Crocodile Paradox. Imagine this. A crocodile takes your child, and it promises to return the child if, and only if, you correctly predict its next move. Suddenly, a simple question becomes an impossible puzzle, and at first glance, it appears simple, yet beneath its surface lies a tension that destabilizes our sense of logical certainty. The crocodile declares that if the parent predicts the outcome correctly, the child will be returned, and if the parent predicts incorrectly, the crocodile will keep the child. The question is not merely about the return of the child, but about the nature of prediction, knowledge, and conditional promises. The scenario matters because it forces reflection on how language, expectation, and logical structure interact in ways that defy simple resolution. The explicit rules are clear: the crocodile will act based strictly on the correctness of the parent's prediction. The parent must state a prediction, and the crocodile's action is contingent upon it. Implicitly, there is a hidden premise that truth and action are separable. We assume the crocodile can calculate correctness, that the parent can make a meaningful prediction, and that the outcome of a prediction can exist independently of the act of enforcing it. These hidden premises set the stage for conflict. Consider the first logical path. If the parent predicts that the crocodile will return the child, and the crocodile intends to honor the rule, then the child must indeed be returned. The prediction is correct, and all seems straightforward. The parent achieves the goal, and the crocodile follows its stated logic. Yet, this path contains a subtle trap: correctness depends on the crocodile's action, but the crocodile's action is contingent on the correctness of the prediction, creating a circular dependency. The second logical path emerges if the parent predicts that the child will not be returned. If the crocodile honors its promise, it must not return the child. But if it withholds the child, the prediction is accurate, obligating the crocodile to return the child. Conversely, returning the child renders the prediction false. At this juncture, the crocodile cannot act without violating the terms, and the logic collapses under its own weight. The conflict crystallizes when action and prediction cannot simultaneously satisfy the conditions. A statement about the future becomes a trap, a logical snare, from which neither parent nor crocodile can escape without contradiction. The paradox arises not from moral ambiguity, but from the self-referential structure of conditional truth tied to action. This contradiction persists because language, prediction, and enforcement are entangled. The Crocodile Paradox exposes a fault line in our assumptions about causality and truth. When a conditional statement refers to the correctness of its own fulfillment, classical logic fails to provide guidance. The paradox resides at the intersection of logic, metaphysics, and epistemology. It tests the limits of reasoning about knowledge, prediction, and contingent action, while touching upon ethics, in the sense of promise-keeping. Classically, philosophers have regarded it as an illustration of a self-referential paradox, akin to the liar paradox. Alternative interpretations frame it as a problem of decision theory, or language games, emphasizing context, intention, and pragmatic reasoning over abstract formal logic. Each interpretation illuminates aspects of human cognition, and the fragility of assumed certainty. Attempts at resolution include formal logical analysis, modal logic, and game-theoretic approaches. Some solutions propose that the crocodile must suspend action, or redefine the terms of correctness. Others argue the paradox reveals a limitation, rather than a resolvable contradiction. Success is partial, clarity is achieved only by acknowledging the inherent self-reference, not by eliminating it. The broader implications extend to law, negotiation, and any scenario where conditional promises depend on predictive judgment. It demonstrates that certain structures of conditional reasoning are inherently unstable, and that predictive certainty can be undermined by the mere act of defining correctness as contingent on action. Conceptually, it challenges our understanding of causality, responsibility, and the limits of rational foresight. Ultimately, the crocodile paradox reveals the vulnerability of logical systems to self-referential constructs. It exposes limits in how language, prediction, and action can coexist without contradiction. The paradox is both a warning and an invitation, a warning about the perils of circular reasoning, and an invitation to explore the terrain where logic, expectation, and reality intersect. We are left with the lingering question of whether certainty can ever exist when truth depends on its own verification. In facing this paradox, we confront not merely a puzzle, but the unsettling realization that some questions resist resolution, compelling us to acknowledge the boundaries of understanding, and the delicate architecture of reason. The Grandfather Paradox. Suppose you are holding your existence like a photograph, trembling, fading, uncertain. Time travel enters, not as fantasy, but as a grenade. The Grandfather Paradox begins with a simple, violent question asked. If you travel backward and kill your grandfather, what follows? Your birth evaporates, your journey never starts, act undoes itself. Cause collapses into effect, effect devours cause, logic fractures openly. The paradox emerges because time demands consistency, yet invites interference. Change the past, and the conditions enabling change disappear entirely. This is not confusion, but clash between freedom and structure. Time behaves like a closed book, resisting edits mid-sentence. Yet consciousness rebels, imagining agency reaching across eras, reshaping origins. The conflict sharpens where determinism confronts human responsibility directly there. If events are fixed, intention becomes illusion, choice becomes performance. If events are flexible, consequences spiral beyond comprehension rapidly forever. The grandfather stands symbolically innocent, representing roots, continuity, and dependence. To erase him is to sever lineage, memory, and inheritance. Philosophically, the paradox interrogates identity, asking what anchors the self. Are we products of events, or authors capable of revision? If your past shapes you, destroying it annihilates the shaper. The question cuts deeper: does survival require obedience to history? Some theories escape the trap, branching timelines, self-healing universes. Others deny travel entirely, preserving causality by forbidding transgression absolutely. Yet emotionally, the paradox endures because it mirrors human regret. We fantasize about undoing pain, rescuing love, correcting fatal mistakes. The story whispers a warning: some changes dissolve the changer. Attempting mastery over time risks erasing meaning built through suffering. The paradox therefore functions as ethical boundary, not scientific puzzle. It asks whether power should be used, even if attainable. In confronting it, we confront limits, humility, and becoming itself. Time, then, is not merely dimension, but a moral medium. The Grandfather Paradox leaves us unsettled, yet sharpened, awake inside. It closes by reminding us, existence persists because past remains. To move forward, we must carry history, not assassinate it. Every moment inherits countless moments, silently negotiating what can change. The paradox survives because it refuses comfort, resolution, or escape. We stand within time, not above it, bound yet responsible. That tension defines humanity, creative, destructive, haunted by consequence always. Thus the Grandfather Paradox endures, a mirror held against ambition. It asks not what time allows, but what we should. Answering requires wisdom, restraint, and acceptance of irreversible paths chosen. In that acceptance, meaning stabilizes, and existence earns continuity again. The paradox finally fades, leaving responsibility heavier than possibility itself. Time remains intact because we choose preservation over omnipotent regret. Such choice defines maturity, acknowledging power without surrendering conscience ever. The Grandfather Paradox therefore speaks softly, yet carries lasting weight. It reminds us living forward requires honoring what cannot return. Within this constraint, freedom survives, sharpened by irreversible context alone. The past becomes foundation, not enemy, supporting fragile present choices. Thus the paradox instructs quietly, teaching care before courageous interference. Every imagined journey backward tests our willingness to live responsibly. We emerge sobered, aware that erasure is rarely salvation enough. Continuity, not correction, sustains identity across uncertain temporal horizons forever. The Grandfather Paradox lingers because it protects that fragile truth. Time travel fades, philosophy remains, asking us to tread gently. Our lives depend on what we refuse to change sometimes. That refusal anchors existence, preserving origin, consequence, and meaning together. The paradox ends without resolution, only responsibility, gravity, and silence. Silence invites reflection, where power yields to ethical restraint alone. There, humanity chooses continuity over cleverness, survival over domination itself. The grandfather paradox thus concludes, unresolved, yet profoundly instructive still. It lives wherever memory matters, and actions echo beyond intention. In respecting time, we ultimately respect ourselves as moral beings. That respect closes the loop, preventing paradox from consuming meaning. What remains is life, linear, vulnerable, and worthy of care. The question fades, replaced by commitment to live forward honestly. Time forgives nothing, but rewards reverence with continuity over everything. Thus we walk onward, carrying ancestors, consequences, and unfinished hope. The grandfather paradox watches silently, reminding us why restraint matters. Existence persists because we let the past remain untouched intact. The ship of Theseus, a vessel of ancient legend, once carried the hero home from his victories in battle. Over the years, each worn plank, every frayed rope, and weathered mast was replaced until not a single original piece remained. And yet, it was still called Theseus's ship. This story, simple in form yet profound in implication, has traveled through centuries not as a tale of seafaring glory, but as a meditation on identity itself, on what it means for something, or someone, to remain the same amid inevitable change. At the heart of the ship of Theseus lies a single, piercing question: if every component of a thing has been replaced, is it still the same thing? The question seems innocent at first, almost childlike, but beneath it stirs the entire problem of existence, continuity, and self. When the last plank of the ship is renewed, does the name Theseus's ship still refer to that vessel, or merely to the memory of what once was? The paradox emerges because our intuitions split. On one hand, we feel that gradual replacement preserves identity. After all, the ship's repairs were continuous, not sudden. On the other hand, logic tells us that once all parts are replaced, the ship's physical substance is entirely different. And if the discarded planks were reassembled elsewhere, creating a second ship identical to the first, which one would be Theseus's true vessel? The paradox forces us to confront the tension between physical continuity and conceptual identity, between matter and meaning. The conflict arises not in the ship's wood or nails, but in the framework of thought itself. Our minds cling to stability, to the illusion of permanence. We name, we categorize, we preserve identity because it comforts us against the flux of time. Yet existence defies such simplicity. Every living being, every human body, is in quiet replacement, cells dying, regenerating, transforming. We are living ships of Theseus, rebuilt moment by moment, while somehow believing we remain ourselves. The paradox is no longer about wood and water, it becomes a mirror to our own fragile continuity. The ship of Theseus exposes the deep fracture between what is and what is meant. Philosophically, it challenges both metaphysics and ethics. What anchors identity, the matter that composes us, or the pattern that defines us? Heraclitus might say that no ship ever remains the same, for one cannot sail the same sea twice. Locke might argue that identity rests not in material sameness, but in continuity of consciousness. Modern thought extends this question into technology and existence. If a mind could be copied, pixel by pixel, into another body or machine, would that copy still be you? Or merely a perfect illusion of you, sailing on a different sea? This paradox stirs emotion because it whispers an unsettling truth about mortality. We cling to the notion of a stable self, a soul unshaken by change. Yet the ship of Theseus suggests that what we call the self may be nothing more than persistence through transformation, a narrative we tell, not a structure we preserve. Every memory rewritten, every experience added, every cell replaced, and still we say, "This is me." Perhaps identity is not an object but a story, an ever-renewed declaration that resists the silence of oblivion. And still, a question remains unresolved: if we are each a ship in constant repair, what truly defines our authenticity? Is it the continuity of memory, the pattern of thought, or the mere act of naming? When the last piece of the old has vanished, what makes the new still belong to us? The paradox refuses closure because its essence is to remain open, to haunt every boundary we draw between the same and the different, between the living and the remembered. The ship of Theseus endures not because it offers an answer, but because it reminds us that change and identity are inseparable. The ship sails onward, rebuilt yet unbroken, carrying within it the ghost of its former self. Perhaps that is the quiet truth it reveals, that identity is not the preservation of what was, but the courage to continue despite what has been lost. Like the ship, we drift through time, remade by every moment, and still we whisper the same name to ourselves, believing, hoping, that something within us has never truly changed. The Bootstrap Paradox. Time is often imagined as a linear river, flowing inexorably from past to future, yet some theories of time travel challenge this notion, twisting the current into loops, spirals, and knots. The Bootstrap Paradox, a conundrum born from these loops, asks us to confront a reality where cause and effect lose their grounding, where something can exist without an origin, floating untethered through the corridors of time. It is a paradox that destabilizes our understanding of history, identity, and the very meaning of creation. At its heart lies a deceptively simple question: if an object or piece of information is sent back in time and becomes the source of itself, where did it truly originate? Imagine a scientist receiving a blueprint for a revolutionary machine from their future self, only to build it and later send the plans back to the past. The machine exists, the plans exist, yet the original creator never does. How can something have an existence without a beginning? The question is not merely about physics, but about the foundations of causality itself, the thread that stitches reality together. The paradox emerges from the collision of intuition with temporal mechanics. Normally, causes precede effects, and every creation has a source. Yet in the Bootstrap Paradox, the chain of causation curves upon itself, forming a closed loop where the effect becomes the cause. A song, a novel, an invention could exist eternally, yet have no origin point, no moment of conception outside the loop. The mind struggles to reconcile this, because our logic is bound to linear sequences, yet time, in this scenario, mocks our linear understanding, folding back like a Mobius strip. Conflict arises where we try to assign responsibility or authorship. Who owns an idea that has no origin? If the blueprint for the machine exists only because it was sent from the future, does the future self deserve credit, or is the concept simply a self-sustaining anomaly? The paradox challenges notions of originality, merit, and historical truth. It suggests a universe where events are self-perpetuating, where beginnings and endings lose their meaning, and where existence itself can be circular, indifferent to human notions of causality and narrative closure. Philosophically, the Bootstrap Paradox touches deep existential chords. It forces us to confront the instability of time, the fragility of memory, and the illusion of beginnings. If an object or idea can exist without origin, then our understanding of creation, responsibility, and destiny becomes provisional, subject to revision by forces beyond comprehension. It asks us to consider whether reality is a fixed chain of events or a malleable landscape, where cause and effect are not absolute, but dependent on perspective, timing, and intervention. This paradox is a mirror reflecting our desire for certainty, yet showing us that some truths may forever evade a linear explanation. Emotionally, it is unsettling. The Bootstrap Paradox evokes a quiet dread, a recognition that the universe may operate on rules fundamentally alien to human logic. It undermines our sense of order, of fairness, of the meaningful sequence of life. Ideas and objects might exist without origin, without purpose, without accountability. Our histories, personal and collective, could be echoes in an endless loop, looping back upon themselves in patterns we cannot fully trace. The paradox is not just a theoretical puzzle, it is a meditation on the limits of understanding, a reminder that some questions may exist not to be solved, but to expand the mind and unsettle complacency. Ultimately, the Bootstrap Paradox confronts us with the fragile boundaries of time and causation, compelling us to ask whether beginnings are necessary, whether origin is essential, or whether existence itself is enough. It teaches that in a universe where time can fold, every effect may be both cause and consequence, and every story may carry within it its own genesis. It leaves us suspended between logic and imagination, between certainty and wonder, reminding us that the mysteries of time are as much about perception as about reality, and that sometimes the most profound truths are those that defy linear explanation. The simulation hypothesis. The world we see, the reality we live in, might not be real at all. What if our lives, everything we know, is nothing more than an intricate simulation, designed by beings far beyond our comprehension? Is this universe truly what it seems, or is it merely a grand illusion? What if everything we experience, every choice we make, is predetermined, programmed, or simulated? The simulation hypothesis, proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom, suggests that it is statistically more likely we are living in a simulated reality than in the base reality. Bostrom argues that as technology advances, future civilizations could create simulations indistinguishable from real life, making it almost impossible to discern the real from the artificial. The theory challenges our very understanding of existence, as it implies that everything, time, space, consciousness, could simply be an artificial construct. But why does this idea seem so paradoxical? If we're in a simulation, what does that make the world we perceive as reality? Do the objects we touch, the memories we cherish, and the relationships we form carry any weight at all, or are they just lines of code? The paradox lies in the duality between perception and existence. If everything we experience is simulated, does it mean we are not real? Or, does our awareness of our simulated nature somehow validate our existence? If we are indeed in a simulation, how can we ever know the true nature of our reality, given that all our senses and understanding are products of the simulation itself? The conflict within the simulation hypothesis emerges when we try to reconcile our subjective experience with the objective reality it suggests. If we are merely characters within a vast digital construct, how can we find meaning or purpose? Does it diminish the significance of our actions, relationships, and emotions? Can the pain we feel or the love we share still be genuine, even if it is part of a simulated program? The debate stirs up a sense of existential dread, questioning the authenticity of everything we hold dear. Are we puppets controlled by unseen programmers, or are we free agents within an artificial system? In its deepest form, the simulation hypothesis forces us to confront our understanding of what it means to be real. Philosophically, it speaks to the core of human experience, the desire to know the truth about the universe and our place within it. If we live in a simulation, does it change the meaning of our lives? If the universe is nothing more than sophisticated code, is there any point in searching for truth, beauty, or justice? Or are these just artificial constructs too, created to give our simulated lives meaning? The very idea challenges the foundational principles of human knowledge, epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, making us question everything from our perception of time to the moral implications of a simulated existence. The implication of the simulation hypothesis is profound. If we are in a simulation, it might mean that our reality is governed by a set of rules and boundaries we cannot escape, no matter how advanced we become. The boundaries between artificial and real may blur to the point where we no longer care whether we are real or not, as long as we continue to live within the confines of our perceived existence. Yet, this realization doesn't necessarily bring comfort. It could be a sobering reminder that we are not the masters of our own fate but rather subjects within a preordained framework, with no more power over our destiny than a character in a video game. As we peer deeper into the possibility of the simulation hypothesis, we're forced to confront a difficult question: does it matter? If we are in a simulation, does our understanding of reality change anything about how we live? Are we so conditioned by our perceptions of the world that the idea of being simulated feels irrelevant, even absurd? Or, does this understanding open up a new dimension to human existence, allowing us to search for meaning beyond the illusion? Whether we are real or simulated, the pursuit of meaning remains a quintessential part of our nature. Perhaps that, in itself, is the one truth we can hold on to, regardless of the nature of the world we live in. Twin Paradox. Imagine two brothers, identical in every way, yet bound by the invisible threads of relativity. One stays on Earth, tethered to the familiar rhythm of days and nights, the other climbs aboard a spaceship, hurtling toward the stars at speeds that bend reality itself. When he returns, decades may have passed for him, while the brother who remained on Earth has aged far more. This is the twin paradox, where time itself becomes a stranger. At the heart of this enigma lies a question that unsettles the mind: if motion is relative, and both twins see the other as moving, why does one age less than the other? Is time absolute, or merely a mirror reflecting perspective? Can the universe harbor truths so counterintuitive that even reason falters? The paradox emerges from the very equations that describe our cosmos. Einstein's theory of special relativity declares that time dilates for those in motion relative to a stationary observer, and yet, each twin sees the other as moving. Each expects the other to be younger upon reunion, a symmetrical expectation born from the fundamental principle of relativity. Yet, symmetry collapses when the traveling twin turns around, breaks the journey's continuity, and returns. The mathematics resolve neatly, but the intuition rebels. How can one clock run slower when motion is reciprocal? The conflict is stark, rooted in acceleration and frames of reference. The earthbound twin remains in a single inertial frame, experiencing time uniformly. The traveler, however, must accelerate to leave, decelerate to turn, and accelerate again to return. In these moments, the simple symmetry dissolves. Time for the traveler stretches and compresses, an invisible hand rewriting the passage of years, while the earthbound twin's world ticks steadily onward. The paradox is not a failure of physics, but a confrontation between our expectations and the universe's rules, a reminder that reality does not yield to common sense. Beyond the equations lies a philosophical confrontation. Time is no longer a constant river, flowing equally for all who live beside it. It is a malleable medium, entwined with motion and gravity, suggesting that our existence is a fragile interplay between circumstance and perspective. What does it mean that one life can age more slowly, that experiences can be stretched or compressed without altering the essence of the individual? It forces reflection on the nature of identity, the meaning of shared history, and the impermanence of the familiar. If two beings start as mirrors of each other, and one returns fundamentally altered by the passage of time, what remains unchanged, and what defines continuity of self? Emotion surfaces here, subtle yet profound. The twin who stayed behind may feel grief, betrayal by time itself, witnessing the loss of years that he never lived alongside his sibling. The traveler returns with memories compressed, eyes witnessing fewer sunsets, hands that have touched fewer decades. The universe permits both realities simultaneously, yet human intuition aches at the dissonance. In this clash, science and emotion intersect, revealing the quiet terror and wonder that comes from understanding one's own fragility in a cosmos unconcerned with expectation. The twin paradox is more than a physical phenomenon, it is a meditation on perspective and the human condition. It challenges the illusion of absolute time, exposes the limitations of intuition, and confronts us with the inevitability of change. It whispers that even the most intimate bonds, the shared minutes and decades of life, are subject to forces far beyond comprehension. It invites us to ponder our place in a universe where motion shapes reality, and where every choice alters the unfolding of existence. Ultimately, the paradox leaves us with a lingering contemplation: time, for all its measured constancy, is deeply personal. The cosmos may march on, indifferent to our longing for uniformity, but within that indifference lies freedom, a reminder that every life, every journey, is singular. The twin who traveled has returned not merely younger, but transformed, and in that transformation lies a reflection of what it means to confront the infinite, to endure the vastness of experience, and to face the sublime dissonance of existence itself. The Sorites Paradox begins with something as simple as a heap of sand. Take one grain away, and it is still a heap. Remove another, and yet it remains. Step by step, grain by grain, the heap diminishes, until, somehow, what remains is no longer a heap at all. This paradox challenges the boundaries of language, the precision of concepts, and the limits of human reasoning, revealing the fragility hidden within seemingly straightforward definitions. It is a quiet, almost invisible puzzle that lingers in the ordinary, in what we take for granted, testing the edges of our perception and understanding. At the heart of the paradox lies a deceptively simple question: when does a collection of grains cease to be a heap? There seems to be no exact point, no clear threshold where heap becomes not heap. Each incremental change appears insignificant, yet cumulatively, these changes transform the object entirely. The question confronts us with the tension between vagueness and certainty, inviting us to consider whether precision is an inherent property of the world or merely a construct of our language and thought. The paradox arises because our reasoning seems flawless at each step, yet the conclusion defies common sense. If one grain is removed from a heap, it remains a heap. If this logic is repeated, eventually, the heap will be reduced to a single grain, which is clearly not a heap. The conflict between our intuitive judgment and formal reasoning exposes a gap in the way we apply concepts, highlighting the tension between incremental change and categorical labels. Each step is individually rational, yet the totality of steps leads to an outcome that appears irrational or absurd. The tension surfaces in the very act of defining. Words like heap, bald, or tall possess a fluidity that resists exact measurement, yet we rely on them to communicate and reason. The paradox exploits this fluidity, revealing the fragility of human categorization. It confronts us with a question that cannot be resolved by mere counting or observation, for the ambiguity is embedded in the language itself, not in the material reality. This is where conflict ignites, between linguistic precision and lived experience, between incremental logic and holistic judgment, between the way we think the world operates and the way it actually unfolds. Philosophically, the Sorites Paradox carries a weight that extends beyond sand or words. It is a meditation on the limits of human knowledge, a mirror reflecting the tension between the finite mind and an infinite continuum. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that many distinctions we make, and many certainties we hold, may be illusions born of convenience. It challenges the belief in absolute boundaries, nudging us to accept a world of gradients, where transitions are continuous, and definitions are provisional. In doing so, it touches on deeper questions about identity, change, and the subtle ways in which the universe resists our desire for neat categorization. The paradox also exposes a vulnerability in reasoning itself. Our comfort with clear-cut answers is disrupted by the recognition that some truths exist in the gray, where logic and intuition diverge. The Sorites Paradox does not merely puzzle, it unsettles. It makes us question our assumptions about continuity, about the power of language, about the stability of concepts we trust to structure our understanding. In the end, it is less about sand or heaps and more about the mind's relentless pursuit of certainty in a world that refuses to offer it. Ultimately, the Sorites Paradox leaves us with a quiet, unsettling reflection: life, much like a heap of sand, resists absolute categorization. Change is incremental, often imperceptible, yet transformative. What we name and define is provisional, fragile, and contingent upon context. The paradox reminds us that understanding is rarely binary, that boundaries are porous, and that wisdom may lie not in forcing precision, but in embracing ambiguity. In its simplicity, it triggers profound contemplation, challenging us to navigate the spaces between words and reality, between logic and intuition, between the finite human mind and the infinite subtlety of existence. The Barber Paradox. In a quiet town, the barber is a figure of routine and order, the one who shaves every man who does not shave himself. A simple premise, yet lurking within its folds is a question that gnaws at logic itself, a riddle that seems innocent but quietly destabilizes certainty. Who shaves the barber? It appears straightforward at first glance, a trivial inquiry about daily habits. Yet, the moment we try to answer, the clarity dissolves. If the barber shaves himself, he violates the rule that he shaves only those who do not shave themselves. If he does not shave himself, he becomes the subject of his own service, again violating the rule. The question is both simple and unanswerable, a loop with no exit. The paradox emerges because of the structure of the statement itself. It is self-referential, a condition in which the object of discussion, here, the barber, refers back to itself in a manner that produces contradiction. Ordinary logic expects a proposition to be either true or false. But here, the statement refuses that binary, creating a space where truth cannot exist without self-annihilation. The town's barber, a symbol of daily normalcy, becomes a mirror reflecting the impossibility embedded in language and definition. The conflict is subtle but profound. It is not a dispute between two people or a flaw in observation, but a conflict within reason itself. The paradox exposes a fault line in how we construct rules and apply them universally. We assume that every entity can be neatly classified under consistent rules, yet some constructions, like the barber, resist classification. Logic falters, not because it is weak, but because the premises create an impossible scenario. The barber cannot exist, and yet the idea insists on its presence, haunting our attempts to reconcile it. Philosophically, the paradox challenges our understanding of definition, self-reference, and the limits of language. It resonates with deeper questions about truth. Can statements about themselves ever be fully coherent? It touches upon the nature of infinity in thought, the loops that arise when we try to map the infinite onto the finite. The barber becomes more than a person, he becomes an allegory for human attempts to impose order on reality, for the desire to define the world without encountering contradiction. Every language, every logic system, carries within it the seeds of these limits, where clarity collides with self-referential complexity. This is a lesson in humility, a confrontation with the boundaries of certainty. Philosophers, mathematicians, and logicians have wrestled with such paradoxes for centuries because they illuminate the edges of knowledge. The barber is a cautionary figure, a reminder that not all questions have answers, that some truths collapse under their own weight. It forces reflection on the systems we trust, the rules we impose, and the assumptions we rarely question. Within the small town, the barber stands as both real and impossible, familiar and deeply unsettling. Ultimately, the paradox lingers in the mind, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a lens through which to view the fragility of logic. It invites a meditation on contradiction, on the spaces where our language fails, on the moments when certainty fractures. In that fracture, there is insight, the recognition that reality, thought, and expression are not always harmonious. The barber may never shave, may never be shaved, yet his impossibility speaks louder than any act he might perform. It is an emblem of the limits of human understanding, an intellectual echo that continues to provoke, unsettle, and illuminate. So, we return to the quiet town and the figure at the center, not to resolve the question, but to sit with it, to feel the tension it evokes. The barber's chair remains empty, the razor untouched, yet the paradox endures. In this endurance, there is a strange beauty, a confrontation with the impossible, a mirror held up to reason itself, and the realization that some truths are not found in answers, but in the questions they leave behind. Fermi Paradox. Have we ever truly wondered if we are alone in the universe? The question feels simple, almost innocent, yet it carries a weight that unsettles the mind. The Fermi Paradox confronts us with this profound query: if intelligent life is probable, why have we seen no evidence of it? The cosmos stretches vast and infinite, teeming with billions of galaxies, each hosting billions of stars, around which countless planets orbit. Astrophysics suggests that many of these worlds lie within habitable zones, where conditions could foster life. Chemical building blocks are ubiquitous, emerging naturally in nebulae and protoplanetary disks. By probability alone, life should not be unique to Earth. Civilizations should have arisen elsewhere, perhaps long before humanity, leaving traces of their existence, radio signals, technological markers, or even interstellar probes. Yet the night sky remains silent, a void where we expect chorus. This silence sharpens the paradox. On one hand, the Drake equation offers a framework estimating the number of civilizations in our galaxy, incorporating stellar formation rates, planetary prevalence, the emergence of life, and the development of intelligence. Even conservative estimates suggest a galaxy teeming with potential. On the other hand, our observations yield nothing. No definitive signals, no artifact, no encounter. The contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the absence of evidence transforms expectation into mystery. The universe is both statistically crowded and eerily empty at the same time. The conflict intensifies when we consider the timescales involved. The Milky Way is over 13 billion years old, Earth itself a relatively recent arrival. A technologically advanced civilization could colonize the galaxy in a few million years, a mere blink in cosmic time. Yet, if expansion is possible, why do we not witness signs of prior colonization or communication? Are civilizations self-destructive, extinguishing themselves before reaching interstellar maturity? Or do they consciously avoid contact, adhering to a cosmic etiquette we fail to comprehend? Perhaps the universe harbors life but cloaks it in silence, or perhaps we are truly alone, an exceptional emergence of consciousness in an indifferent cosmos. Philosophically, the Fermi Paradox invites reflection on human existence, ambition, and mortality. It forces us to confront our significance against the backdrop of the infinite. If we are alone, our fragility and rarity demand humility and stewardship, urging us to preserve this singular oasis of life. If we are not, the silence itself provokes caution, hinting at cosmic perils, or a hierarchy of intelligence beyond our comprehension. It stirs a mixture of awe and unease, questioning whether our search for others is an expression of curiosity, fear, or hope. In facing the paradox, we encounter not only the unknown beyond the stars but the unknown within ourselves. The paradox challenges more than science, it challenges imagination and philosophy. It compels us to explore our assumptions about life, intelligence, and progress. It asks whether technological advancement guarantees survival or whether the universe is indifferent to our existence. It confronts us with temporal and spatial scales that dwarf human perception, rendering our triumphs and failures almost inconsequential, yet profoundly meaningful precisely because they are fleeting. Each observation, each probe sent into the void, becomes a testament to human audacity and our refusal to accept cosmic silence without inquiry. In the end, the Fermi Paradox leaves us suspended between hope and dread, a tension that shapes both scientific inquiry and existential reflection. It forces a confrontation with the limits of knowledge, the weight of probability, and the emotional resonance of solitude. Whether we are the first, the last, or simply unobserved, the question remains, piercing and unrelenting: where is everybody? In seeking the answer, we define the scope of our curiosity, the depth of our courage, and the meaning we attach to our brief, luminous existence. The universe may not answer, yet in asking, we assert our presence, inscribing humanity's consciousness onto the canvas of the cosmos, daring to illuminate the darkness with inquiry and imagination. The unexpected hanging. A prisoner sits in his cell, informed by the judge that he will be executed at noon on one weekday of the following week, yet the day will come as a surprise. The man ponders this strange sentence, a shiver crawling down his spine, for anticipation is now part of his punishment. Every tick of the clock weighs heavier, each morning he awakens with mounting dread, his mind ensnared in the promise of an unpredictable doom. The words linger in the air, simple yet confounding: you will not know the day of your execution until it arrives. He begins to reason. Could it be Friday? No, if Thursday passes without incident, Friday would no longer be a surprise. That cannot be, he concludes. Thursday then. But if Wednesday passes and he is still alive, Thursday becomes obvious, too. Slowly, he eliminates each day, until he convinces himself that execution is impossible. He walks the cell with a sense of triumph, yet unease coils within him, for logic has offered certainty, and certainty is rarely comforting in the face of mortality. The paradox breathes in this tension between expectation and surprise. How can a predictable event be, by definition, unexpected? The puzzle lies not in the act of execution itself, but in the prisoner's attempt to anticipate the unknown. Logic suggests a sequence of elimination, yet the nature of surprise defies calculation. Can the human mind ever reconcile certainty with the unpredictable, or is some knowledge inherently beyond reason's reach? Each day, he tests reality against his reasoning, only to find the future resisting definition, slipping like smoke through grasping fingers. The paradox deepens as thought collides with intuition. The man's confidence in deduction blinds him to the immediacy of experience, and yet, that very foresight is what ensures his surprise. It is not the event that defies logic, but the reasoning that seeks to cage it. The prisoner's mind becomes a battlefield, where probability wars with perception, certainty clashes with expectation. This conflict, stark and uncomfortable, exposes the fragile architecture of human understanding. What seems impossible by logic manifests in the tangible world, and the tangible shatters reason's neat structures. At the heart of the paradox lies a confrontation with temporality and awareness. The execution cannot occur on a day the prisoner anticipates, yet anticipation is precisely what frames the paradox. Life, like the prisoner's weak, resists foreknowledge, yet human consciousness craves it. We construct timelines, project consequences, and seek to impose order, yet reality often subverts this structure. The conflict is philosophical, existential. It is a mirror of the mind's struggle against uncertainty, a meditation on the limits of cognition, a reminder that not all truths can be untangled through reason alone. This riddle of anticipation and surprise forces a reflection on knowledge and control. In attempting to master the unknown, the prisoner discovers his own vulnerability, the thin line separating insight from illusion. What we believe we understand can blind us to what is actually unfolding. Every plan carries within it the seeds of its undoing when confronted with the unpredictable. The paradox reveals that certainty is seductive but deceptive, and that true understanding requires humility before the indeterminate. It is a lesson that resonates beyond the prison walls, touching on the human condition itself. In the end, the execution arrives unheralded, perhaps on Wednesday, perhaps earlier, yet the man is genuinely startled. His reasoning, meticulous and elegant, has failed to anticipate reality. Surprise is real, but logic appears impotent, illustrating a tension between what we know and what we can never fully know. It is not merely a puzzle, but a meditation on existence, the interplay of foresight and ignorance, expectation and revelation, control and surrender. The paradox lingers, like a shadow over the mind, prompting reflection, stirring unease, leaving a haunting clarity. The unexpected cannot be tamed, and the human heart must reckon with the unknowable. The Banach, Tarski Paradox. Imagine holding a perfect orange in your hand, feeling its weight, its form, certain that its substance is finite, tangible. Now imagine, by some strange alchemy of mathematics, splitting that orange into pieces, rearranging them, and ending up with not one, but two oranges, identical to the first, every bit accounted for yet multiplied. This is not magic, nor illusion, but the unsettling reality proposed by the Banach-Tarski Paradox, a theorem that shakes the very foundation of our understanding of space, matter, and measure. At its heart, the paradox challenges the certainty we place in physical intuition. Can something be divided into parts that, when rearranged, produce more than the original? The idea seems absurd, even heretical, because it contradicts the law of conservation, the principle that matter cannot simply appear from nothing. Yet, within the strict formalism of set theory and the axiom of choice, this is not only possible, it is mathematically demonstrable. A solid sphere can be decomposed into a finite number of non-overlapping subsets, then reassembled through rotations and translations into two spheres identical to the first. Logic has performed an act of legerdemain. The central question emerges: how can a theorem, so rigorously proven, suggest a phenomenon that our senses declare impossible? How can mathematics, the language we trust to describe the universe, permit something so blatantly contradictory to lived reality? This is no minor discrepancy, but a profound collision between abstraction and intuition, a place where the mind must choose between mathematical purity and the palpable laws of the physical world. It becomes a paradox precisely because it defies expectation, because it forces a confrontation with the limits of human comprehension. The pieces into which the sphere is divided are not the ordinary fragments we handle, they are infinitely complex, unmeasurable in any conventional sense, existing only as abstract sets. You cannot, in reality, cut an orange this way, because physical matter resists the infinite precision mathematics requires. Yet in the realm of pure theory, the rules are absolute, unyielding, and indifferent to human intuition. The paradox arises from this dissonance, rigorous logic predicting impossibility, a truth that cannot exist in the tangible world yet cannot be denied in the abstract one. Conflict emerges between what is mathematically true and what is sensibly credible. It forces us to confront the tension between idealized reasoning and embodied experience, between the world as it is observed and the world as it is imagined. Mathematics becomes a mirror reflecting possibilities that our senses cannot grasp, and in that reflection, reality itself appears mutable, fragile, and curiously negotiable. It is a quiet revolt against the assumption that what can be conceived must be physically realizable, a challenge to the sanctity of everyday logic. Philosophically, the Banach-Tarski paradox is a meditation on the nature of infinity, on the boundaries of knowledge, and on the human need to reconcile reason with experience. It reveals that certainty is provisional, that our grasp of the universe is partial, mediated by the tools we employ and the axioms we accept. It provokes a disquieting awareness that what we perceive as immutable may, under different rules, dissolve into contradiction, reminding us that reality is not merely what is seen or touched, but also what can be rigorously conceived. Ultimately, the paradox leaves us suspended in wonder and unease. It is not a call to believe the impossible, but an invitation to reconsider the contours of possibility itself, to appreciate the gulf between abstract perfection and material constraint. In contemplating the Banach-Tarski paradox, we are confronted with the fragility of intuition, the audacity of mathematics, and the strange beauty of a universe that allows its own logic to stretch beyond the grasp of experience, whispering that reality is, perhaps, far stranger than we dare to imagine. The paradox of choice. What does it mean to be free, if freedom itself becomes a burden? In a world where options multiply endlessly, does the abundance of choice liberate us, or quietly trap us in indecision, doubt, and dissatisfaction? This is the paradox of choice, a question that lingers in the spaces between our desires and our decisions. We live in an era where possibilities are limitless, from careers to lifestyles, from products to partners, every facet of life presents countless alternatives. Supermarkets teem with hundreds of varieties of the same product, streaming platforms host an infinite library of content, and social media offers an unending stream of paths to self-expression. Choice is celebrated as the cornerstone of autonomy, yet beneath its glittering promise lies a subtle weight, often unnoticed until we confront the consequences of our own selection. The paradox emerges when freedom becomes overwhelming. Beyond a certain point, more options do not equate to more satisfaction. Instead, they foster anxiety, indecision, and regret. The mind, faced with endless alternatives, struggles to evaluate each, to predict which will maximize happiness. The possibility of making the wrong choice casts a shadow over the act of choosing itself. What once symbolized empowerment now carries the seed of discontent. Here, the very mechanism designed to enhance life subtly erodes its quality, revealing the irony embedded in abundance. At the heart of the paradox lies conflict, between desire and discernment, between expectation and reality. We want the perfect choice, yet perfection is illusory. We seek happiness through options, yet the abundance of possibilities dilutes satisfaction. Each choice invites comparison, each decision invites doubt, and each rejection carries the ghost of what might have been. The mind, caught in a cycle of evaluation, second-guesses every selection, amplifying disappointment, even when the outcome is objectively favorable. In freedom, we encounter limitation, the limitation imposed not by scarcity, but by our own consciousness. Philosophically, the paradox challenges our understanding of human agency and fulfillment. If choice is meant to liberate, why does it often constrain? Perhaps true freedom lies not in endless options, but in clarity, in intentional limitation, in the courage to embrace imperfection. Happiness, in this sense, becomes less a product of opportunity and more a function of acceptance. By reframing the way we approach choice, by valuing engagement over exhaustive comparison, we discover that liberation resides not in the multiplication of options, but in the discernment of what we truly need, and in the willingness to live with what we select. Our pursuit of more often obscures the subtle elegance of sufficiency. The human mind, dazzled by the infinite, forgets the finite joys available in simplicity, presence, and decisiveness. In navigating life's labyrinth of options, we confront a deeper truth, that desire, left unchecked, becomes an instrument of our own suffering. The paradox is not merely external, it is internal, a reflection of the tension between what we want and what we can reconcile within ourselves. To live fully is to navigate choice with wisdom, to embrace limitation as a path to freedom, to recognize that the weight of endless possibilities can crush, while the focus of deliberate selection can uplift. Ultimately, the paradox of choice forces a confrontation with human consciousness itself. It exposes the fragile architecture of satisfaction, the interplay between freedom and fear, between abundance and disillusionment. It invites us to question not only what we choose, but why we choose, and how the very act of choosing shapes the texture of our existence. In a world of infinite alternatives, clarity becomes an act of courage, acceptance becomes a form of liberation, and the mindful engagement with choice becomes a mirror reflecting the essence of our humanity. Freedom, then, is not the possession of infinite options, but the wisdom to navigate the finite within the infinite, the serenity to embrace what we select without perpetual regret, the courage to acknowledge that happiness is found not in the quantity of choice, but in the quality of our engagement with it. The paradox endures, subtle and unyielding, yet within it lies the opportunity for reflection, for conscious living, and for discovering that in choosing wisely, we may finally find the liberation that choice itself promised. Raven Paradox. Darkness cloaks the mind when we ponder the unseen, the unobserved, the truths hiding in plain sight. Imagine holding a statement as simple as, "All ravens are black," a truth so seemingly evident, yet poised to unravel under scrutiny. It is not the raven itself, but the logic behind its observation, that invites an abyss of doubt. This is where the human mind meets the boundaries of reason, where certainty frays, and where the Raven Paradox emerges, a puzzle that whispers of the fragile dance between evidence and belief. At its heart lies a question deceptively straightforward: how do we confirm a universal truth? If every raven we see is black, have we proven that all ravens are black, or merely observed countless examples that align with our expectation? And conversely, if we encounter a green apple, does that, by the strange symmetry of logic, also lend support to the claim about black ravens? The question lingers, teasing the edges of intuition, forcing the mind to confront the unnatural elasticity of confirmation. The paradox takes root in the principle of equivalence. Logically, the statement, "all ravens are black," is identical to, "all non-black things are not ravens." Yet here lies the twist: observing a red car, a white wall, or a blue pen, none of which are ravens, should, by pure logic, confirm the statement about black ravens. This collision of common sense and formal reasoning creates tension, a cognitive dissonance that gnaws at our trust in empirical observation. How can something so unrelated appear to support a claim so specific? How can a green apple echo the color of a raven it has never met? Conflict emerges between intuition and deduction, between what feels reasonable and what logic decrees. Intuitively, we dismiss a non-black, non-raven object as irrelevant, yet deduction insists that relevance is absolute, a binary of truth and falsity that ignores human perception. Evidence becomes paradoxical: every black raven confirms the statement, yet every non-black non-raven also counts, diluting the meaning of confirmation. Here, epistemology, the study of knowledge itself, meets absurdity, and we find ourselves suspended in a liminal space where knowing and seeing diverge. The philosophical weight of the paradox is profound. It exposes the fragility of induction, the method by which humans generalize from finite experiences to universal laws. It challenges our assumption that relevance is intuitive, forcing a confrontation with the abstract structure of logic. It is not merely a quirk of thought, but a mirror reflecting the limits of reason. How do we separate coincidence from corroboration? How do we assign significance to observation when every object in the universe could be implicated in supporting or refuting a claim? The Raven Paradox whispers of the subtle tyranny of formal logic, the cold, impartial architecture that governs truth yet disregards human expectation, reminding us that knowledge is rarely a simple reflection of experience. In the shadow of the paradox, a deeper contemplation unfolds. It asks us to examine the architecture of certainty, to interrogate the very notion of evidence. It provokes unease, even existential vertigo, by suggesting that the path to truth is often counterintuitive, that relevance is a construct, and that our minds crave narrative where logic offers only structure. It forces a meditation on the nature of reality and the fragile scaffolding of reason upon which we lean. Ultimately, the Raven Paradox is more than a logical curiosity, it is an invitation to think beyond comfort, to embrace complexity, and to sit with the tension between what we observe and what must be inferred. It reminds us that clarity is often tangled with contradiction, and that every certainty carries the seed of doubt. In contemplating the black raven and the green apple, we are called to inhabit the space between intuition and intellect, where true reflection resides, and where philosophy transforms from abstract exercise into the intimate exploration of how we know, what we trust, and what it means to claim understanding in a world that defies simplicity. The Lottery Paradox. Imagine standing in a crowded hall, thousands of tickets in hand, each promising a vanishing hope of fortune. Everyone is almost certain they will lose, yet the possibility of winning glimmers in the back of the mind. How can we reconcile this near certainty with the reality that one ticket must win? This tension lies at the heart of the lottery paradox, a subtle yet unsettling problem in epistemology that challenges how we understand belief, probability, and rationality. The paradox arises from a simple premise. Consider a fair lottery with 1,000,000 tickets and only one winner. It seems rational, almost instinctive, to believe of any individual ticket that it will not win. After all, the probability of losing is overwhelming, nearly 1. Applied to each ticket, this reasoning feels entirely justified. We construct our beliefs ticket by ticket, confident in our assessment of overwhelmingly likely outcomes. Yet the logic collapses when we consider the lottery as a whole. If we believe of each ticket that it will lose, we implicitly believe that no ticket will win. But the very rules of the lottery guarantee a winner. This contradiction, where individually rational beliefs aggregate into an impossible collective belief, is the essence of the paradox. Rationality seems to betray itself, revealing an uncomfortable tension between probability and certainty, between local reasoning and global truth. The conflict here is subtle but profound. Each belief about a ticket appears reasonable, grounded in evidence and probability. Yet the collective set of these beliefs is inconsistent. It exposes a fissure in our understanding of knowledge. Can we claim to know something with high probability if, taken together, our claims are logically impossible? The paradox forces a confrontation with the limits of deductive reasoning applied to probabilistic thinking. It demonstrates that rational belief is not always additive. Piling together individually justified beliefs can yield a contradiction, an insight both unsettling and illuminating. Philosophically, the lottery paradox probes the nature of rationality itself. It questions the assumption that rational agents can treat high-probability propositions as knowledge, highlighting a tension between our intuitive judgments and formal logic. It challenges probabilistic epistemology, asking whether belief must be reserved for certainty or if near certainty suffices. The paradox also intersects with everyday decision-making. From medical diagnoses to financial planning, we constantly act on highly probable assumptions, yet the lottery paradox reminds us that probability alone cannot guarantee coherence. Rational action becomes a negotiation between what is overwhelmingly likely and what is logically possible. Moreover, the paradox carries an existential resonance. It mirrors the fragility of our convictions in a world governed by chance. We navigate life with beliefs that feel safe, yet collectively, these beliefs may mislead us, exposing the limits of certainty and the omnipresence of contingency. It evokes a quiet unease, a recognition that human reasoning, brilliant as it is, cannot always reconcile the improbable with the inevitable. In this tension lies the paradox's enduring power. It is both a technical puzzle and a reflection on the precariousness of knowledge itself. Ultimately, the lottery paradox asks us to reconsider the very foundations of rational thought. It warns against complacency in the face of probability, urging humility in our claims to know. Belief, it suggests, is never entirely safe, never entirely justified, and yet indispensable. In every choice, every judgment, we balance the probable against the necessary, navigating a landscape where certainty is rare and contradiction is always lurking. It is a paradox not merely of logic, but of human understanding, a mirror to our desire for coherence in a world that refuses simple truths. The hall empties, tickets flutter to the floor, and only one person walks away with the prize. Every other ticket loses, just as expected. And yet, the lesson lingers: certainty is fragile, probability deceptive, and rationality, however sharp, must confront its own limits. The lottery paradox is not just a puzzle about tickets or numbers, it is a meditation on belief, on the tension between what we expect and what must be, and on the quiet, unsettling beauty of knowing that even our most rational convictions can lead us astray. Paradox of tolerance. Tolerance is often celebrated as the mark of a civilized society, a virtue that allows diversity of thought, belief, and expression to flourish. Yet, beneath its noble veneer lies a tension few confront, a quiet contradiction that threatens the very fabric of tolerance itself. It is here, in this uneasy space, that the paradox of tolerance emerges, questioning whether absolute permissiveness can sustain a free and just society, or whether it harbors the seeds of its own destruction. At its core, the paradox asks a piercing question: should a society tolerate intolerance? If tolerance extends unconditionally, even to those who would erode it, does it remain a virtue, or does it become an unwitting accomplice to oppression? This question is not abstract, nor theoretical, it strikes at the heart of political life, social ethics, and the fragile equilibrium between freedom and security. History offers grim illustrations, where unchecked hatred and extremism, once permitted under the banner of liberty, shattered the very systems that tolerated them. The paradox becomes apparent when tolerance meets its antithesis. Tolerant societies champion freedom of speech, thought, and association, yet those who reject tolerance exploit these freedoms to propagate intolerance. Their ideology is corrosive, their method subversive. A society that refuses to resist them in the name of consistency risks annihilating the space for dissent, diversity, and moral discourse. The paradox is subtle, yet profound. In trying to honor tolerance universally, society may create conditions in which tolerance itself cannot survive. Conflict arises where principles collide with survival. Should the tolerant tolerate the intolerant, even when their presence endangers the values that define the tolerant? This is not merely a legal or procedural dilemma, it is existential. The struggle is internal, within the moral conscience of a society, between the desire to uphold the highest ideals and the imperative to protect them. To allow the intolerant unchecked power is to render tolerance meaningless, to suppress them risks betraying the very ideal it seeks to preserve. Each choice bears consequence, each action ripples through the moral architecture of civilization. Philosophically, the paradox illuminates the limits of liberal thought, exposing a boundary where ethical consistency collides with pragmatic necessity. Tolerance is not infinite, it is a virtue contingent on context and on the preservation of the framework that enables it. Philosophers warn that ignoring this boundary invites the triumph of the very forces tolerance seeks to contain. True wisdom, therefore, demands discernment, a recognition that defense of freedom may require the measured restriction of those who would destroy it. It is a call to vigilance, to moral courage, and to the nuanced understanding that ethics cannot operate in a vacuum, isolated from consequences. This insight resonates beyond politics, touching personal and societal relationships alike. Tolerance is not a passive acquiescence, it is an active, deliberate choice, exercised with awareness of its limits. To extend it uncritically is to risk complicity in injustice, to withdraw it prematurely is to risk authoritarianism. The paradox teaches that discernment, not indulgence, sustains moral integrity. It warns that principles, however virtuous, require boundaries, lest they be hollowed out by those who exploit their openness. Ultimately, the paradox of tolerance compels reflection on the fragility and responsibility of freedom. It challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truth that ideals alone do not guarantee their survival. Society must navigate the tension between generosity and self-preservation, between openness and protection. Tolerance without boundaries is not strength, it is naivety. Boundaries without justice are not protection, they are tyranny. To resolve the paradox is not to abandon tolerance, but to practice it wisely, fiercely, and with an awareness that the endurance of liberty demands both compassion and discernment. In the end, tolerance is a gift that must be earned and guarded, not a license for destruction. Its paradox is a reminder that moral courage is as essential as moral principle, that freedom without vigilance invites subversion, and that the noblest ideals require the wisdom to know when to defend them, even against those who would exploit them. The paradox does not diminish tolerance, it sharpens it, transforming it from a passive ideal into an active, living principle, fragile yet resilient, demanding both empathy and strength, as the foundation upon which a free society can endure. Friendship Paradox. They say you are more popular than you think, yet oddly, most of your friends have more friends than you do. At first, it sounds flattering, a quirk of social networks, a playful statistical trick. But linger on it, and it gnaws at the edges of your perception, revealing a quiet discomfort about connection, influence, and the invisible hierarchies we inhabit. This is the friendship paradox, a counterintuitive reality tucked into the mathematics of social life, where the average friend is always more connected than you are, a mirror reflecting an uncomfortable truth about human networks and our place within them. In social networks, connections are uneven. Some people anchor vast webs of relationships, while others touch only a few. When you examine the network, these hubs, people with many friends, weigh the average heavily. Statistically, if you pick a friend at random, you are more likely to select someone with a larger circle, someone whose life seems fuller, richer, more vibrant. It is not that you are unpopular, but the structure of friendship ensures that your vantage point is skewed, that the lens you look through exaggerates the social reach of others, and in doing so, reshapes your perception of belonging. It becomes a paradox because intuition rebels against it. We imagine networks as egalitarian, fair, balanced. We expect our circles to reflect our own social realities. Yet the network whispers otherwise, most of your friends have more friends than you. The contradiction is subtle, almost invisible, a statistical sleight of hand that tricks the mind into seeing imbalance where none was intentionally placed. We are trapped in a perceptual loop, witnessing the lives of those around us and measuring them against ourselves, forgetting that what we see is not the whole, only a biased sample of connection itself. This discrepancy carries an emotional weight. You glance at your friends' lives and feel a pang of inadequacy, a quiet questioning, am I enough? Do I belong? The paradox is not merely numerical, it is psychological, a reflection of how we internalize social comparison. Even in a world where everyone is connected, we measure ourselves by the invisible standards set by the social supernodes, those few whose networks amplify their presence. Conflict arises not from malice or neglect, but from the inevitable tension between personal perception and structural reality, between the self we inhabit and the networked self we imagine. Philosophically, the friendship paradox exposes the fragility of subjective certainty. It teaches that perception is often a distorted reflection of reality, that belonging is simultaneously experienced and quantified, that social truth and social feeling rarely align. It asks us to confront the limits of our intuition, to acknowledge that what feels universal may in fact be skewed by unseen forces. There is a quiet humility in recognizing that your social world, though intimate and known, exists within a vast lattice where influence and visibility are unequally distributed, and yet all are essential threads in the same web. And within that recognition lies a subtle liberation. The paradox invites reflection, not despair. It compels us to differentiate between quantity and quality, between network size and depth of connection. To understand the friendship paradox is to confront the illusion of equivalence and embrace the uneven, intricate, often invisible ways in which relationships shape experience. The mirror it holds up is both disquieting and clarifying, a reminder that comparison is a human reflex, but understanding requires stepping beyond the mirror, beyond the statistics, into the quiet terrain of empathy, gratitude, and mindful presence. Ultimately, the friendship paradox is less about who has more friends than you, and more about the way you inhabit the space between perception and reality. It exposes the tension between the self and the network, between solitude and connection, and between the metrics we track and the lives we live. In acknowledging it, we confront the subtle architecture of social life, the hidden hierarchies that frame our relationships, and the delicate truth that belonging is as much about awareness as it is about attachment. In that awareness lies a kind of philosophical grace, the ability to exist fully in your own circle, to honor the connections you have, and to recognize that the network is vast, but your place within it is meaningful, even if measured differently. The Schrödinger's cat. The world is often described as predictable, bound by cause and effect, yet Schrödinger's cat confronts us with a reality that defies intuition. Imagine a cat, sealed in a box, its fate intertwined with a mechanism so delicate that the flick of a quantum coin can determine life or death. It is simultaneously alive and dead, hovering in a state of suspension, invisible yet profoundly consequential, challenging the very essence of existence. At first glance, this seems absurd. How can something occupy two opposing states at once? Schrödinger, with his thought experiment, did not intend cruelty to a feline, rather, he illustrated a tension between the microscopic and the macroscopic worlds. In the quantum domain, particles behave not as certainties but as probabilities, existing in multiple states until observed. The cat, a tangible creature, becomes the vessel through which the abstract concept of quantum superposition is made concrete, forcing our imagination to grapple with a reality that defies logic. The paradox emerges precisely because our classical intuition cannot accommodate such ambiguity. Observation collapses potentialities into a singular truth. Until the box is opened, the cat exists in a liminal space, suspended between life and death, embodying a reality that is both and neither. This duality undermines our reliance on binary thinking, compelling us to reconsider the absolutes we take for granted, suggesting that certainty may be a fragile illusion, contingent upon perspective, context, and timing. Conflict arises at the intersection of perception and existence. The paradox is not merely scientific, it is existential. It questions the nature of reality itself. Is truth independent of observation, or is it constructed through consciousness? In confronting the cat, we confront ourselves, our compulsion to define, measure, and control, our discomfort with ambiguity. The tension lies in the cognitive dissonance of acknowledging a truth that cannot be known directly, a truth that exists in multiple states until we force it into one. The cat is both a mirror and a challenge, reflecting the limits of human comprehension, exposing the boundaries of what we can claim to know. Philosophically, Schrödinger's cat becomes more than a quantum curiosity, it is a meditation on existence, uncertainty, and the nature of knowledge. It forces a reckoning with the principle that reality may be fundamentally probabilistic, that certainty is often provisional, and that observation, our act of noticing, has power not only to reveal but to define. In a world of infinite possibilities, the cat represents the tension between potential and actuality, between what is hidden and what is made manifest. It asks us to embrace ambiguity, to accept that some truths may exist beyond the reach of definitive knowledge, and that our attempts to pin down reality may always encounter the shadow of uncertainty. Ultimately, Schrödinger's cat lingers in the mind long after the thought experiment is described. It haunts our assumptions about life, death, and the delicate balance between knowledge and mystery. The box is closed, yet its implications are open, reverberating through philosophy, science, and consciousness alike. We are left with a profound reflection, that certainty is provisional, perception is participatory, and existence may be far stranger than we dare imagine. The cat is both lesson and enigma, alive and dead, a silent reminder that the universe does not yield its secrets willingly, and that true understanding often requires the courage to inhabit uncertainty. Liar Paradox. The moment a person declares, "I am lying," the universe tilts. Instantly, truth and falsehood collide, leaving reason suspended in midair, a fragile construct trembling at the edge of logic. Such a simple utterance, yet beneath its surface lies a labyrinth of uncertainty, a tension that philosophers have chased for millennia. How can a single statement encapsulate both certainty and impossibility? This is the liar paradox, a mirror reflecting the instability of our most basic assumptions about truth. At first glance, it seems trivial, almost playful, a linguistic trick. But the deeper one probes, the more unsettling it becomes. If the statement, "I am lying," is true, then the speaker must be lying, which would render the statement false. Conversely, if it is false, the speaker is not lying, which paradoxically makes the statement true. No matter how you approach it, the assertion cannot settle into a stable position. It exists in perpetual oscillation, a self-referential loop with no exit, defying the neat boundaries that define conventional logic. The paradox arises because language attempts to describe reality, yet sometimes language can entangle itself, referring to itself in ways that undermine its own meaning. Ordinary statements about the world operate smoothly, the sky is blue, or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, are verifiable and coherent. But when language turns inward, when statements refer to their own truth or falsity, the rules collapse. The liar paradox exposes the fragile scaffolding of logic, revealing that even in a world governed by reason, there are statements that reason cannot comfortably accommodate. It is a subtle rebellion against the assumption that every statement must be either true or false. The point of conflict lies in the tension between language and reality, between self-reference and consistency. Human thought relies on classification. Propositions are either true or false, right or wrong. The liar paradox refuses to be categorized, slipping through the cracks of binary logic, taunting the limits of comprehension. Philosophers have tried countless strategies to resolve it, from redefining truth to invoking hierarchical language systems, yet each solution carries its own complexities. It is not merely a puzzle to be solved but a mirror held up to the assumptions underlying all knowledge, a reminder that certainty is fragile and contingent. Philosophically, the liar paradox challenges the very notion of absolute truth. It forces us to confront the limitations of reason, the ways in which language can deceive, and the possibility that some questions may forever evade definitive answers. In its recursive structure, it hints at a profound truth about existence itself, that ambiguity and contradiction are not merely flaws in thinking, but inherent aspects of consciousness and communication. To engage with the paradox is to glimpse the edges of logic, where clarity dissolves into uncertainty, and every assertion carries a shadow of doubt. It invites reflection on the human desire for certainty, the tension between knowing and doubting, and the humility required to face the unresolvable. In the end, the liar paradox is more than a logical curiosity, it is a philosophical provocateur. It shakes the foundation of certainty, challenges our trust in language, and forces us to confront the limits of understanding. Like a hall of mirrors, it multiplies perspectives, each reflecting a contradiction, each refracting truth into an endless spectrum. Its power lies not in resolution, but in the space it opens for contemplation, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is as much about questioning as it is about answering. In the delicate dance between truth and falsehood, we find the raw, unsettling beauty of thought, and the eternal invitation to wrestle with the unknown. The paradox of value. Imagine standing in a market, surrounded by the glittering allure of gold, yet feeling an urgent thirst for water. You reach for a gold coin, and then for a drop of water, and a strange tension grips you. Why does something so essential, like water, seem far less valuable than something as ornamental as gold? This is the paradox of value, a question that has puzzled economists, philosophers, and thinkers for centuries, whispering a subtle critique of human perception, desire, and necessity. The paradox arises from a distinction between usefulness and market price. Water sustains life, fuels industries, and nourishes crops, yet it often carries little monetary weight. Diamonds, rare and beautiful, shine brightly in society's esteem, commanding fortunes despite their limited practical use. Here lies the dissonance. Utility does not always align with cost, and scarcity can outweigh necessity. The paradox forces us to confront a curious tension between survival and status, between intrinsic worth and perceived worth. It becomes a paradox because human valuation is not merely rational, it is mediated by perception, culture, and desire. Our minds assign value based on scarcity, demand, and symbolic meaning rather than sheer utility. A resource abundant and essential may be taken for granted, its true worth invisible until shortage strikes. Conversely, rarity, luxury, and social prestige amplify the perceived importance of an item far beyond its practical function. Value, then, is a mirror reflecting both human need and human imagination, sometimes distorting reality in ways that are both fascinating and unsettling. Conflict emerges at the junction of necessity and desire. We revere the non-essential, yet neglect the indispensable. Societies allocate resources to adornment and accumulation, while essentials linger in abundance, undervalued. Philosophers argue that this disjunction is not a trivial quirk of economics but a profound commentary on human priorities. The tension reveals our susceptibility to illusion, the way desire can overshadow reason, and how collective perception can elevate the trivial while diminishing the vital. It is a mirror held to our choices, forcing a confrontation with both our practicality and our folly. On a deeper level, the paradox of value questions the very meaning of worth. Is value inherent in the object, or does it reside entirely in perception? If diamonds command millions, is it because of their properties or the narrative we have constructed around them? If water flows freely and sustains millions without cost, does its worth diminish, or is it merely invisible to the eyes of a society that measures life through currency? This philosophical inquiry exposes a dual reality, one of objective necessity, one of subjective desire, each shaping human behavior in ways that are rarely aligned. We are caught in the tension between survival instincts and symbolic aspiration, between the tangible and the imagined. Reflecting on this paradox evokes a sense of both humility and urgency. It compels us to rethink priorities, to measure value not only in price but in contribution to life, to society, and to well-being. It invites a recognition that what is most precious is often undervalued until scarcity renders it undeniable. Yet it also illuminates the human capacity to assign meaning, to create desire, and to construct narratives that elevate certain objects or experiences far above their practical worth. Understanding this duality is essential to navigating the modern world, where abundance coexists with deprivation, and where perception frequently outstrips necessity. In the end, the paradox of value is not merely an economic curiosity, it is a philosophical mirror, a moral compass, and a cautionary tale. It reminds us that worth is not always visible, that scarcity can deceive, and that the heart often values what the mind cannot explain. To grasp it fully is to acknowledge the tension between need and desire, to confront the illusions of social preference, and to cultivate awareness of what is truly essential. In a world where gold gleams brighter than water, the paradox of value challenges us to look beyond surface allure, to weigh life itself as the ultimate measure, and to question whether our pursuit of the rare has led us to overlook the vital. The Hedonism Paradox. The Hedonism Paradox begins with a simple promise: pursue pleasure, and life will reward you with happiness. It whispers seductively in our ears, urging indulgence, urging gratification, painting a life where joy is the currency and desire the roadmap. Yet, the more we chase pleasure, the more it seems to slip through our fingers, elusive as mist, leaving behind only the shadow of satisfaction. Pleasure, in its immediate form, is concrete: an exquisite meal, a decadent night, the thrill of fleeting accomplishments. It engages the senses directly, offering an unmistakable surge of gratification. But beyond these tangible experiences lies a subtler, more insidious reality: pleasure is reactive, not generative. The mind, wired to seek more once it tastes the first, does not pause to savor. Each moment of indulgence sets the stage for a deeper craving, a silent acceleration of desire that leaves the soul restless. This is where the paradox crystallizes. Hedonism, in its pure pursuit, promises fulfillment but delivers the opposite. The more one fixates on personal pleasure as an end in itself, the more it recedes, like water in a tightening fist. Happiness, when sought directly through pleasure, becomes unstable, fragile, almost impossible to grasp. It is not merely ironic, it is structural. Pleasure, pursued for its own sake, undermines the very satisfaction it claims to guarantee. Conflict emerges in the tension between instinct and reflection. Instinct drives the pursuit of sensory delight, the immediate satisfaction of impulses, the apparent path to joy. Reflection, however, confronts the truth that these impulses are fleeting, that gratification in isolation does not yield lasting contentment. The hedonist is caught between two irreconcilable impulses: the desire for more, and the recognition that this desire cannot ever be fully quenched. It is a loop, self-perpetuating, merciless, a trap laid by the architecture of desire itself. Philosophically, the Hedonism Paradox exposes the limitations of pleasure as a moral or existential compass. It confronts the assumption that happiness is synonymous with indulgence, challenging us to reconsider what it means to live well. Ancient thinkers like Epicurus argued that simple, moderate pleasures cultivate enduring contentment, implicitly acknowledging the paradox: fulfillment cannot be forced, cannot be directly commanded, it emerges indirectly, through balance, reflection, and the absence of excess. Modern interpretations echo this, suggesting that the obsessive pursuit of pleasure diminishes it, that desire is a force best guided rather than obeyed blindly. The paradox also touches the emotional core of human experience. There is an ache in knowing that what we seek most, joy, is never guaranteed by the very pursuit we believe will deliver it. The relentless chase leaves a hollow echo, a sense of insufficiency, a quiet despair that sits beneath the fleeting triumphs of indulgence. Yet this despair is not punitive, it is instructive. It reveals the mind's mechanics, illuminates the boundaries of desire, and whispers that fulfillment often arises when we are no longer grasping for it directly. Ultimately, the Hedonism Paradox is less a condemnation of pleasure than a meditation on its limits. It forces us to interrogate our impulses, to discern the difference between transient delight and lasting well-being, to recognize that happiness may be a byproduct of life well lived rather than its explicit aim. The pursuit of pleasure, when detached from reflection, becomes a mirage; when tempered by wisdom, it becomes a guidepost. The paradox is not resolved by renunciation alone, nor by indulgence alone, but by the delicate alignment of action and understanding. So, as we navigate the contours of desire, the lesson emerges stark and unyielding: happiness cannot be seized, it cannot be commanded, it cannot be caught by chasing. It is found in the interstices of life, in the spaces between pursuit and surrender, in the quiet recognition that fulfillment is often the echo of a life lived with awareness. The Hedonism Paradox lingers, not as a question to be solved, but as a mirror, reflecting the subtle, persistent truth that the more we clutch at pleasure, the more it slips, and the more we live fully, the more it arrives unbidden. The moment an arrow leaves the bow, it seems to exist in motion, cutting through the air, a perfect trajectory towards its target. Yet, if we freeze time, no matter how briefly, the arrow occupies a single, static point. In that instant, motion disappears. How can something move if, at every moment, it is motionless? This is the arrow paradox, a puzzle that has intrigued thinkers for millennia, a whisper from antiquity that questions the very nature of reality. The arrow paradox originates from Zeno of Elea, a philosopher who challenged the common understanding of movement and time. Zeno argued that space and time are infinitely divisible, that every motion can be broken into a series of frozen, indivisible instants. In each instant, the arrow rests in a particular position, unmoving, because a single moment cannot contain movement. If time is composed entirely of such moments, how then can motion truly exist? The paradox does not lie in the arrow itself, but in the contradiction between our perception of continuous movement and the analytical dissection of time into discrete, static points. At the heart of the paradox is the very fabric of temporal experience. Motion, it seems, cannot be reconciled with a sequence of immobile moments. The conflict arises when logic, rigorous and unforgiving, meets sensory reality. Our eyes witness the arrow in flight, yet reason dictates that it must be still in each instant. If every snapshot of time is motionless, the notion of continuous movement collapses, leaving only a conceptual ghost of what we call motion. The arrow becomes both moving and not moving, a symbol of tension between intuition and abstract reasoning. The paradox forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: what we perceive may not correspond to the underlying structure of reality. It asks whether motion is an illusion, a construct of human consciousness attempting to stitch together isolated instants into a seamless narrative. Zeno's argument is not merely a trick of language, it is an ontological challenge. It provokes reflection on the assumptions that underpin our understanding of the world, questioning whether continuity is fundamental or simply a convenient framework imposed by the mind. The arrow, frozen in each instant, mirrors the fragility of certainty in the face of deep abstraction. The conflict emerges most starkly in the interplay between mathematics and experience. Mathematics, with its rigorous slicing of time into points, seems to negate motion, while our senses insist on its reality. This tension is not confined to philosophy, it resonates in physics, where the discrete and continuous collide in quantum mechanics and relativity. The paradox persists because it exposes a conceptual gap, the inability of language and logic to fully capture the fluidity of life. Each instant, rigid and defined, resists the unfolding continuity we take for granted, leaving us suspended between observation and explanation, certainty and doubt. Philosophically, the arrow paradox speaks to the limits of human understanding. It challenges the assumption that reality can be completely dissected and comprehended through reason alone. Motion, continuity, and change become enigmatic, reminding us that some aspects of existence evade complete capture. Zeno's arrow, in its frozen flight, becomes a metaphor for our struggle with the infinite, the ungraspable, and the tension between perception and logic. It forces a confrontation with the idea that understanding may always lag behind experience, that knowledge is partial, provisional, and shadowed by the mysteries of time itself. Ultimately, the arrow paradox invites contemplation rather than resolution. It asks us to dwell in uncertainty, to embrace the discomfort of paradox, and to recognize the limitations of absolute certainty. The arrow, eternally frozen in each instant, continues its flight in our minds, a silent reminder that reality may be more intricate, elusive, and profound than any single observation can reveal. In that fleeting, suspended moment, we are called to witness not just motion, but the profound tension between the seen and the known, the finite and the infinite, the lived and the analyzed. The arrow's flight becomes not just a question of physics or logic, but a mirror reflecting the delicate, paradoxical nature of human thought. The Omnipotence Paradox. The Omnipotence Paradox begins with a simple, disarming question: can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it? At first, it appears almost playful, a puzzle for the mind, yet beneath its simplicity lies a profound confrontation with the limits of power, a riddle that challenges the very notion of omnipotence. Omnipotence, in philosophical discourse, is often defined as the ability to do anything, to possess unlimited power over all that exists. It evokes images of God shaping the universe at will, of absolute authority unbound by any law or constraint. But the paradox forces us to ask, if power is truly limitless, can it encompass self-contradiction, or is there an inherent boundary even within the concept of absolute capability? The paradox arises when the definition of omnipotence collides with logic itself. If the all-powerful being can create a stone so massive that it cannot lift it, then there is something it cannot do, lift the stone. Conversely, if it cannot create such a stone, then there is something it cannot do, create the stone. Either way, a limit emerges, exposing a conflict between omnipotence and logical consistency, revealing that some concepts may be fundamentally incompatible, even with the idea of unlimited power. This point of conflict is not merely a linguistic trick or a playful jest, it strikes at the heart of our understanding of authority, divinity, and the structure of reality. The paradox forces us to confront the tension between abstract ideal and practical coherence. Omnipotence, when scrutinized, ceases to be an unqualified attribute and becomes a lens through which we examine the boundaries of possibility, the fragile interplay between power and reason. The stone is not just a stone, it is the mirror in which the concept of absolute power confronts itself, reflecting the limits that logic imposes on imagination. Philosophically, the paradox illuminates deeper truths about human understanding. It suggests that certain ideas, no matter how enticing, cannot exist without contradiction, and challenges us to differentiate between conceptual possibility and actual feasibility. In examining the limits of omnipotence, we are also examining the architecture of thought itself, recognizing that reason imposes boundaries that even divinity cannot escape. It invites reflection on humility, on the recognition that even the most seemingly infinite entities may be confined by the structures they inhabit, by the logic that underpins existence. The paradox, therefore, is less a critique of power and more a meditation on the nature of thought, a prompt to explore the contours of meaning and coherence in all our ideas. Ultimately, the omnipotence paradox leaves us suspended in reflection, caught between awe and perplexity. It compels us to question what it truly means to be unlimited, to confront the delicate interplay between imagination and logic, and to accept that the very notion of absolute power may contain within it the seeds of its own limitation. The question of the stone is not merely a theological exercise, it is a profound meditation on the architecture of possibility, an invitation to explore the tension between what we can conceive and what can consistently exist. In the end, the paradox does not resolve, it resonates, haunting the mind with its elegant simplicity, and reminds us that some questions, by their very nature, are designed to challenge, to unsettle, and to illuminate the boundaries of thought itself. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox begins in the quietest possible way. A woman, lulled into slumber, cut off from the relentless flow of time, wakes in a world where memory is fragmented, and certainty feels like a luxury she can no longer afford. She is aware of an experiment, she knows there is a coin involved, yet the boundaries between past and present, between one awakening and another, blur into a haunting ambiguity. The stillness of her bedroom becomes a stage for a profound philosophical dilemma, a place where intuition and probability collide. At the heart of this enigma lies a deceptively simple question: upon waking, with no recollection of previous awakenings, what credence should she assign to the coin having landed heads? One might assume that, stripped of all memory, the answer is obvious. Yet, as she sits there, suspended between sleep and consciousness, the mind recoils from simplicity. Should she trust the fairness of the coin, the 50-50 split dictated by chance, or should she weigh her present experience differently, acknowledging the structure of the experiment itself? The paradox emerges because the scenario distorts our usual notions of probability. Each awakening is not merely a repetition of the experiment but an event conditioned by the experiment's design. If the coin lands tails, she awakens twice; if heads, only once. Our intuitions, honed in linear time, falter when faced with the recursive layering of experience. We ask a question about likelihood, yet the context reshapes it, forcing a collision between temporal perspective and objective chance. The numbers themselves remain unchanged, but their interpretation fractures under the weight of repeated consciousness. Conflict arises precisely in this fracture. One side, the Haffer, insists that the probability of heads should remain 50%, rooted in the fairness of the coin and detached from the contingencies of memory. The other, the Thirder, argues that each awakening must be counted, adjusting credence to reflect the doubled opportunity for tails. Both positions appeal to reason, yet both seem to betray intuition. The mind resists settling, a rift opens between abstract calculation and the felt reality of waking life, between what ought to be logically consistent and what feels experientially truthful. The paradox is not merely numeric, it is existential, a mirror held up to the very process of knowing. Philosophically, the Sleeping Beauty Paradox probes the limits of knowledge, the malleability of belief under uncertainty, and the nature of subjective experience. It asks whether probability is a property of the world or a construct of consciousness, whether repeated events create new realities for the mind even when the external conditions remain unchanged. In waking and forgetting, beauty becomes a lens for examining the tension between objective and subjective truth, between the logic of mathematics and the lived experience of self. Her plight echoes larger questions: how do we trust memory when it is incomplete? How do we anchor belief when perception is partial? How do we reconcile the world as it is with the world as we apprehend it? In the silence of her final awakening, the paradox lingers like a shadow. Beauty does not merely confront a coin, a schedule, or a probability, she confronts the fragile architecture of understanding itself. In that stillness, one sees the broader human condition. We navigate life with fragments of memory, glimpses of chance, and fleeting awareness, yet we are compelled to make judgments as if certainty were attainable. The paradox shakes the assumption that waking experience aligns with truth, revealing that even in ordinary acts, awakening, remembering, reflecting, philosophical depth hides in plain sight. Perhaps the ultimate lesson is that clarity is not a gift of certainty but of inquiry. The Sleeping Beauty Paradox invites reflection not for the sake of an answer alone, but to illuminate how perspective shapes reality, how consciousness interacts with probability, and how the human mind, in its fragile and transient awakenings, contends with a universe indifferent to memory. In questioning what she should believe upon waking, Beauty asks a question that resonates with all who seek to navigate uncertainty: what can we truly know when the boundaries of time, experience, and self are not fixed, but fluid, and when every awakening carries both knowledge and ignorance intertwined? In the end, the paradox is not resolved by calculation alone, it persists as a meditation on belief, identity, and the haunting interplay between the fleeting present and the forgotten past. Each awakening, though governed by chance, becomes a mirror, reflecting our persistent struggle to discern the world as it is, from the world as we inhabit it, ever awake yet never fully certain. The Monty Paradox has confused minds for decades, leaving those who encounter it scratching their heads, wondering how something so simple can carry such profound implications. It is deceptively simple but staggeringly deep. Named after the host of the television game show Let's Make a Deal, Monty Hall's paradox has become one of the most famous puzzles in probability theory. In the game, you are presented with 3 doors. Behind one door is a car, behind the others are goats. You choose a door, but instead of revealing your prize, the host, Monty, who knows what's behind each door, opens one of the other two doors, revealing a goat. Then, Monty offers you the chance to switch your choice. The paradox lies in the fact that, counterintuitively, switching doors actually gives you a better chance of winning the car. While it seems like the odds would remain at 50-50, they are, in reality, 2 in 3 if you switch, and only 1 in 3 if you stay. Why? That is where the paradox begins. It seems, on the surface, that the probability should always be 50-50 after Monty reveals a goat. After all, you initially had a 1 in 3 chance of choosing the car, and a 2 in 3 chance of choosing a goat. Once Monty opens a door to reveal a goat, shouldn't your remaining choice still have a 50-50 chance between the last two doors? But the key lies in how the game unfolds. When you first make your choice, there's a high probability, 2 in 3, that you've chosen a goat. If you switch, you win the car. But if you stay with your original choice, you will likely end up with a goat. Your chances of winning the car are tied to the initial probability, which does not reset when Monty opens a door. It merely reveals the hidden nature of the choices, allowing the odds to shift in favor of switching. This paradox challenges our intuition, and in doing so, it forces us to rethink how we perceive probability and decision-making. The point of conflict lies not in the numbers but in our emotional response to them. We have been conditioned to think in terms of fairness and symmetry, expecting that two remaining options should present equal chances of success. The 50-50 split feels right. It's intuitive, and thus, we resist the idea that switching would make a difference. However, this contradiction between intuition and mathematical reasoning creates a profound tension. It mirrors our everyday experiences. How often do we resist changing our minds, even when logic suggests we should? The paradox forces us to confront that internal struggle between emotion and reason, comfort and uncertainty. Our minds are hardwired for patterns, and yet the world often operates on probabilities and chance, neither of which adhere to the symmetry we crave. The Monty Paradox speaks to something deeper than just probability. It addresses the nature of choice, risk, and the human condition. It is a commentary on how we make decisions under uncertainty. The paradox exemplifies the ways in which we are often trapped by our own perceptions. We believe that once we make a choice, it is final. Our intuition reinforces this notion. But the paradox suggests that the world doesn't care about our emotional investment in a decision. When faced with a new set of information, the best course of action may be to pivot, to adapt. This ties into the larger philosophical meaning of the paradox. It challenges us to embrace change, to understand that our initial decisions, however confident we may be in them, are not the final word. Life, much like the game show, doesn't always play by the rules we expect. In our pursuit of truth, we are often faced with the discomfort of realizing that what we believe to be true is merely an illusion. The Monty Paradox reminds us that certainty is rarely as certain as we think. The moment we embrace the possibility that we might be wrong, perhaps even that we might need to change our approach, is the moment we are poised for growth. The paradox calls upon us to rethink our approaches to choice and risk. It invites us to accept that failure does not necessarily come from making a wrong decision, but from not adjusting to new information when it is revealed. As you ponder the Monty Paradox, remember that the choice to switch or stay is not just a question of winning or losing the car. It is a reflection of the choices we make in life, the opportunities we ignore out of fear or stubbornness, and the way we handle change. Life does not reward those who cling to outdated certainties. The paradox invites us to understand that sometimes, the greatest success comes from taking a leap of faith, guided not by initial instincts but by the wisdom gained through experience and knowledge. To switch is not just to change one's mind, it is to embrace the unpredictable nature of life itself. Imagine standing before two boxes, one transparent, one sealed. A silent figure across the table claims to know you better than you know yourself. Your choice has already been predicted, the money already placed or withheld, and yet the decision still feels alive in your hands. This is the quiet tension at the heart of Newcomb's paradox, a thought experiment that seems simple, almost playful, but slowly tightens into something unsettling. You are told the rules clearly, you are given time, logic, and freedom, and yet whatever you choose feels wrong in a different way. The paradox does not shout, it waits, watching reason argue with itself, exposing a crack in how we understand choice, knowledge, and responsibility. The setup is precise. A being with an extraordinary record of prediction places $1,000 in the transparent box, and possibly $1 million in the opaque one. If the predictor foresaw that you would take only the opaque box, it placed the $1 million there. If it foresaw that you would take both boxes, it left the opaque box empty. You now stand at the moment of choice. You may take one box, or both. The past is fixed, the boxes are already filled or empty, and no physical force links your hand to the prediction. The description feels clean, almost mathematical, which is why the discomfort it generates feels so disproportionate. The paradox emerges when two powerful ways of reasoning collide. One path insists on dominance and causation. The boxes are already set, the predictor's work is finished, and nothing you do can change the contents. From this view, taking both boxes is always better, because it adds a guaranteed $1,000 without sacrificing anything real. The other path follows expected success and trust in prediction. The being has almost never been wrong, so the rational move is to act in a way that aligns with $1 million outcome. From this angle, taking only one box is not superstition, but strategic consistency with overwhelming evidence. The contradiction is not a trick, it is structural. Each argument is internally coherent, each uses rational tools correctly, and yet they point in opposite directions. One treats choice as independent of prediction, the other treats choice as inseparable from it. Accepting one seems to require rejecting the other, and yet both feel unavoidable. The paradox survives because neither side makes a simple mistake. Instead, they reveal that our concept of rationality may not be singular, but fractured, sensitive to perspective, assumptions, and time. At the core lies a conflict between causality and correlation, between acting as if the future depends on us, and acting as if it already knows us. If the predictor is accurate, your choice and the prediction are tightly linked, not through force, but through understanding. Yet acknowledging this link feels like surrendering agency, as if your freedom dissolves under observation. Refusing the link preserves freedom, but at the cost of ignoring evidence that seems impossible to dismiss. The paradox traps us between dignity and payoff, between being free and being right. Philosophically, Newcomb's paradox questions what it means to choose at all. If a decision can be predicted with near certainty, is it still a decision, or merely a revelation? If rational action depends on how others model us, then choice becomes relational, not isolated. The paradox suggests that free will may not be about unpredictability, but about ownership, about whether a choice expresses who we are, even if that expression can be foreseen. It also challenges the idea that rationality is purely forward-looking, instead showing how the shadow of the past can shape what feels optimal in the present. More quietly, the paradox exposes an emotional layer beneath logic. Many people feel a pull toward one boxing, not because of calculation, but because it feels honest, committed, almost faithful. Others feel compelled to two box, defending autonomy against manipulation, even hypothetical manipulation. These reactions reveal that our decisions are rarely just about outcomes. They are about self-respect, consistency, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are when no one is watching, or when someone is watching too closely. In the end, Newcomb's paradox does not demand a single correct answer. Its power lies in refusal. It refuses to let rationality rest comfortably, it refuses to let freedom be simple, and it refuses to separate thought from identity. Standing before the boxes, we are not merely choosing money, we are choosing how to understand ourselves in a world that might already understand us first. The wooden boy stands before us, his nose a symbol of innocence and deceit, a simple child's tale that turns into one of the most haunting paradoxes of logic and morality, the Pinocchio Paradox. Imagine him whispering the sentence, "My nose will grow now." The statement seems harmless, yet it fractures the laws of truth, forcing reason to kneel before contradiction. What begins as a fairy tale lesson in honesty transforms into a philosophical labyrinth where truth and falsehood dissolve into each other, leaving behind a question that no wooden puppet, nor philosopher, can fully answer. When Pinocchio lies, his nose grows, this is the law of his existence. But if he says, "My nose will grow now," the world trembles. If the statement is true, his nose should grow, but that growth would mean he has told the truth, and if he tells the truth, his nose should not grow. If the statement is false, his nose should not grow, but that would mean he has lied, and his nose must grow. The result is a loop, a paradox with no escape, a sentence that folds in on itself like a serpent devouring its tail. In that moment, the story stops being a moral fable, it becomes a mirror held to the structure of truth itself. The paradox emerges because Pinocchio's truth claim refers to itself. It is self-referential, like the classic liar's paradox, this statement is false. Both form a logical black hole where truth cannot be consistently assigned. The Pinocchio version is unique because it merges logic with a physical reaction. His body is programmed to respond to moral failure, but here, morality, truth, and cause collapse into one tangled instant. The system that was meant to enforce truth becomes incapable of operating when truth depends on itself. In that fracture, we glimpse something profoundly human, the limits of reason when it confronts self-awareness. At the heart of this paradox lies the conflict between the objective and the self-referential. Pinocchio's world follows clear rules, truth keeps his form intact, lies distort it. Yet the statement he utters dissolves this border. His declaration transforms him from a mere puppet under moral law into an agent capable of questioning the very foundation of that law. The conflict is not about whether his nose grows or not, but about whether truth can remain coherent when it begins to describe itself. Every system of meaning, be it linguistic, ethical, or existential, shudders at this threshold. When something tries to define its own truth, it risks imploding under the weight of self-reference. Philosophically, the Pinocchio paradox becomes an allegory for human consciousness. Like Pinocchio, we exist in a fragile space between what is real and what we claim to be real. Our words shape our world, yet our awareness of that power destabilizes truth itself. The paradox suggests that the moment we attempt to assert an absolute truth about ourselves, we invite contradiction. I am honest, I know myself, I am free, each statement loops back on its speaker, vulnerable to collapse under its own reflection. We live in a state of moral recursion, constantly defining and redefining truth through language that can betray itself at any time. There is also an existential dimension to this paradox. Pinocchio is not just lying or telling the truth, he is trying to understand who he is. His statement, "My nose will grow now," is a cry of awareness, a child testing the boundaries of his own reality. The paradox arises at the moment of self-recognition, when being becomes conscious of itself. In that instant, logic falters, because logic was never built to contain the turbulence of consciousness. The paradox thus reveals something divine and tragic about self-awareness. It is both the birth of truth and the birthplace of doubt. This same tension echoes through philosophy and theology. In Gödel's incompleteness theorems, a mathematical system cannot prove all truths about itself without contradiction. In the Bible, when God names himself, "I am who I am," it carries the same self-referential loop, existence defining existence. The Pinocchio paradox, in its simplicity, exposes this same cosmic wound. It shows that the closer we come to truth, the more we see its circular nature, forever turning inward, chasing itself, unable to find rest. The paradox, then, is not a flaw in the story, it is a revelation of the architecture of thought itself. Emotionally, it is haunting because it strips the story of innocence. The wooden boy, once a symbol of moral growth, becomes a vessel for metaphysical despair. The nose that once punished lies now becomes a question mark, a sign of a universe that cannot decide what truth means when truth becomes self-aware. It is as if the universe momentarily holds its breath, unable to proceed, caught between growing and not growing, between being and not being. In the end, the Pinocchio paradox is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be endured. It reminds us that logic, morality, and identity are built upon fragile foundations, foundations that can crumble the moment we turn our gaze inward. The paradox asks us to accept that contradiction is not the failure of truth, but its most authentic expression. To live honestly, we must live with paradox. To be self-aware, we must accept the impossibility of complete understanding. So, when Pinocchio says, "My nose will grow now," it is not just a logical trap, it is a confession of existence itself. It is the voice of every being who has ever asked, "What is true?" and found that the answer depends on the very question that created it. In that endless loop, truth is not destroyed, it becomes alive, trembling, and unfinished, just like the wooden boy who wanted to be real.